El jefe de la Administración Militar Regional de Odesa informó este martes que al menos 5 personas murieron luego de un ataque ruso con misiles en esa ciudad del sur de Ucrania. Las autoridades ucranianas agregaron que varios edificios residenciales y estructuras civiles resultaron dañadas. El ataque ruso también dejó heridos, entre ellos un niño de 4 años y otro de 12, al igual que una mujer embarazada. En las imágenes de dron podemos ver las cúpulas de una institución educativa de Odesa en llamas después de ser alcanzada por un misil ruso y un equipo de bomberos intentando extinguir el fuego. Medios públicos ucranianos afirman que el edificio, descrito como una academia de derecho, resultó prácticamente destruido.
Credic Leighton is a CNN military analyst and retired US Air Force colonel. He joins me now from Orlando, Florida. Thank you so much for joining us.
Rosemary, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So with Ukraine set to receive this additional military aid from the US, how likely is it that the war-torn nation can reverse Russian gains along the eastern and southern fronts, or is this too little too late?
Well, there are going to be several factors. It really depends on how quickly the aid gets to Ukraine and how quickly the Ukrainians can actually incorporate it into their battlefield tactics and use the weapon systems such as the ATACMS, potentially even F-16s, and other weapon systems that could help them achieve at the very least, a stabilization of the front lines. But in the most optimistic scenario for the Ukrainians, they might be able to roll back the Russian gains of recent months. Those Russian gains are fairly limited, actually, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Ukrainians to take control of the areas that the Russians have occupied for a long time, especially those areas in the Donbass that the Russians have occupied since 2014.
In the end, do you think Ukraine can win this war? And how would you define a Ukrainian victory?
I think we need to have a redefinition of terms when it comes to victory for the Ukrainians. I think it has to basically rely on the capability of the Ukrainians to maintain an independent and viable country that is not beholden to the Russians, that is basically aligned with the West. That may mean that because of the military situation and the lateness of the aid that the Ukrainians are going to be getting, that might mean that the Russians will continue to occupy some Ukrainian territory, even though that's unacceptable to the West and certainly to the Ukrainians. But it's better to do that than it is to lose the country completely. And that is going to, I think, be one of the key things that the Ukrainians have to consider as they move forward. Part of the problem, of course, is the huge disparity in population between the two countries, much to Russia's advantage. And the other thing, of course, is that the military strength of the Russians, at least in terms of sheer numbers, is a lot higher than the Ukrainians, although that gap has narrowed considerably since the Ukrainians have drafted a whole bunch of people into their military.
While US Congress delayed, the damage here was already done. This is rare body camera footage from Russians, confident in their advances in the east, slow but sure. Adding to a list of nowhere villages, falling to Moscow day by day, claiming Monday to have taken here Novaya Mikhailivka, as Ukraine almost always stops short of saying how bad it's got. No more true of that is the fate of Ocheretine, another tiny village in Donetsk, also of sudden unwanted fame. Despite the brutal pounding and evacuation you can see here, a military spokesman claims Sunday the Russians only had a partial foothold. Currently, the part where the enemy is located is under our fire control, and all measures are being taken to knock the enemy out of there, he said. This after days of Russian soldiers posting videos of them raising flags inside the town. Ukraine's official statements, as Russian footage showed a continued advance, showing a distance from reality, common when you're trying to win a war, but uncommonly now angering normally loyal Ukrainian bloggers. So Ukraine's top military commander was forced to set a bleak record straight, saying the front lines had escalated as Moscow has concentrated its efforts in several directions, creating a significant advantage in forces and in means. He said the changing situation had led to an ambiguous understanding. Here is another case in point, Berdice, from which Ukraine was posting bullish videos of Russians being hit just before their commander said they'd withdrawn Sunday. Across the Eastern Front, the news is bleak. The change since the fall of Avdiivka 10 weeks ago stark on this Ukrainian blogger's map. Russia making its most concerted, widespread and consistent advances, perhaps since the invasion. This is Zelensky's problem to keep now as he bolsters morale in towns in the Russian crosshairs. He has the money and so soon the weapons, and the less blame he can shift for failure. We are cooperating with our partners at all levels, he said, to achieve the level of efficiency and assistance that is needed not only to maintain our positions, but also to disrupt Russia's war plans. We're still waiting for the supplies that have been promised to Ukraine. But more is likely coming. Where you just saw Zelensky visit, this is what is left of Chasiv Yar. Yet another town Russia has turned into this smouldering ruin, here with incendiary munitions, in the name of liberating and demilitarizing Ukraine. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, London.
Rusia utilizó gases lacrimógenos y armas químicas contra las tropas de Ucrania. El uso de estos productos está prohibido y viola la Convención sobre Armas Químicas. Estados Unidos acusó formalmente a Rusia e impuso nuevas sanciones a empresas y organismos gubernamentales. Para Estados Unidos no es un incidente aislado y lo atribuyeron a la intención de Rusia de desalojar las fuerzas ucranianas para avanzar en el campo de batalla. Esto coincide con el testimonio de las tropas de Ucrania. En enero Rusia ya había negado el uso de armas químicas.